you know what? I got my ego. I got an inner narcissist. I got an inner bitch. I got an inner, like all of the things that I observe in reality and judging others. I can pinpoint at least one time in my life where I have engaged in that energy myself.
Mm-hmm.
And if I just take everything like I am that, yes, and I feel it and I sit with it, then it has light. Then you have put the eye of awareness onto it, and then it's no longer this hidden enemy on the background. Totally. So yes, we are all the things. We are the narcissists.
Welcome to this episode of the Art of Healing podcast. I'm so excited about this episode. I'm really honored to be having this guest today. And it's interesting because Silvana, who is my guest today, I sort of encountered her at a very pivotal moment in my spiritual journey. And for me, like the spiritual journey is really, it started out as a spiritual journey, but then that spiritual journey evolved into a healing journey. And I think this is inevitably a point that everyone will come to within their so-called spiritual journey. And so I was very lucky to encounter Silvana online. And, you know, I was very, very lucky to find your work at a time that I really needed a certain level of validation in this space. So I never thought I'd end up doing this podcast with you, but I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. It's been a nice little flip because I interviewed you once in my podcast to do like a coaching session. And then now it's the other way around. Such a beautiful full circle moment.
Why don't we start by, introducing yourself for anyone that doesn't know who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Silvana Isaza, and I am a life coach, feminine empowerment mentor, and my work is primarily with women. I have a deep love and passion for just the feminine beings, and I help women get at the root of the blockages that prevent them from actually experiencing that inner freedom, because we don't know that our natural state of being is actually freedom. We think to feel like crap, it's just what is, but that's the distortion. So I think that journey of returning into that state of surrender and peace and innate joy is the journey of healing, and it's a spiritual journey. There's no difference between the two. So that's what I focus my work primarily on.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I wonder, like, was there a point for you as well where you realize the spiritual journey is also the healing journey? Or did you, similar to me, like have this, like you've always been on the spiritual journey, and then at some point you're like, oh my God, I need to deal with my trauma? Was there that point?
You know, it was very interesting for me because I was always inclined to spiritual practices. I was raised in Colombia in like a Catholic school, and there are all these, you know, rules of what was right and wrong and God and the devil and all of this. And I just always had an interest for the occult, for the intangible, very much outside of the church. So at around age 15, like I just did the sneakiest thing. I bought a tarot deck and I was like in my closet, just connecting. And there was this fascination with that world. I'm like, I want to see a ghost. Like it was just very,
I had the same thing.
Yeah, it's like the way you, like, how else could you communicate or feel that thing that is outside of what you know, because the God I knew in the church was just, you know, rigid and tight. And I knew there was something more. So I connected with the divine through that. And in that inclination and in that desire to have that connection, I always took refuge in that. That always made me feel good. And I didn't realize I'm always aware that I had a lot of trauma. I think that most of my life I spent in anger with my mom, anger with society, anger with my father, anger with everyone around me because of how I felt and all the things that happened to me. So I never really got to a point of denial. I was always like, no, I am deeply wounded because of all of this crap. But it was seeking that refuge in spirituality, in what felt good, that that desire of wanting to feel good is what actually led me to my spiritual healing, the healing of my soul and my traumas. So I kind of stumbled upon it, but it was like, that's what I mean. Like I said, there isn't a difference between the two, because I just realized that this desire I had to connect with the divine was the only thing in the way of that was my trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It took me a really long time to figure that out. Like, I think on some level, like the reason that so many of us get into this spiritual space, mind you, I grew up in the same environment as you, grew up Catholic, really kind of strict Catholic Indian family, but I was always drawn to this like occult esoteric world.
Yeah.
And that just grew and grew and grew. And I also had all of this trauma, but I ran away from it for a very long time. And I think it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until maybe the last few years that I couldn't continue running. And I think that's what's happening on a global scale right now. I think like the global
Mm.
circumstances this is what's catalyzing this healing path within the
Yes.
realm of spirituality. um and yeah, it is, as you say, like you realize like your trauma is what is holding you back from moving forward. Hey guys, before we get into today's episode of the Art of Healing podcast, just a quick message to let you know how you can support the show in staying alive. It takes a lot of work to keep a podcast alive, and if you enjoy listening to the show, it would be amazing for you to support this work. There's 3 ways you can support me, and that is by rating the Art of Healing podcast on Spotify. Go over to Spotify or to Apple, wherever you're listening to this, and rate it 5 stars. The next way that you can support the show is by actually becoming a Patreon member. If you head over to patreon.com/tmaster9, you can become a Patreon member and pledge between 3 to 10 euro per month, which will give you early access to the episodes. And if you're a fan of my other work outside of the Art of Healing podcast, you will get exclusive access over on Patreon. The third way that you can support is actually by allowing me to support you. I am a spiritual life coach, and I love working with people who resonate with the topics that we discuss on the show. And if you feel any inclination to working with me, feel free to book a free discovery call over on my website, tanyamaster.com, to explore how a coaching relationship with me might benefit you on your journey of self-discovery. So guys, I thank you for tuning in, and I really hope you enjoy this episode with Silvana. And now back to the show.
Yeah, and it's the way through as well. It's like we think that the trauma is bad because it brings so much suffering, but the reality of it is that I am in my purpose because of my trauma. I am trying to help women because of what I experienced, what I saw, when the way I saw my mother and my grandmother suffer, and all the disempowerment. It was the trauma that actually gave me the depth and the groundwork and all of that fertilizer to actually say, okay, what am I going to do about it? How can I bring love and light, vision to these parts of humanity? And like you said, this whole situation that we're going through, you have the hyper, like, this is doomsday, it's horrible. And I am excited because from personal experience, I know that until you go through that, like, heavy, intense shadow work, and you go and feel everything that needs to be felt, then you won't be able to really feel free, feel like yourself, feel like what we're meant to be feeling like. So collectively, yeah, we're on like time's up. It's time to do some healing and time to return to the roots.
Yeah, it's like it feels like peeling off all of these layers and layers of like conditioned, programmed self, which is just
Yeah.
like it leaves us so disconnected. And yeah, it's been very interesting because like over the last 2 years, it's like the universe has forced so many of us. I feel this way in particular. Like the universe has forced me to look at like all of this darkness, all of this stuff that's I've been pushing away for so long. And it feels like such a concentrated period that it almost makes you feel like you're going crazy. Like, and
Yes.
I think part of it is you do actually have to go crazy, especially as a woman. I think women have such a like there's a stigma around like being a hysterical woman or like being
Mm-hmm.
crazy. But actually, as you said, like you have to go through that to find out who you really are.
Wow. Yeah. It's that wilderness, that craziness. You know,
Mhm.
whenever we look at the collective trauma that women have, it has been a trauma of repression. Now,
Mhm.
collectively, the masculine is also deeply traumatized because if you look at any history book, it's war after war after war after war. And who are the ones going to war? It was the men. So
Mhm.
we have our wounds. So that's why I'm like, let me focus on the feminine wound because that's the one I understand, you know, that's the one that I lived and I live in my life deeply and in my surroundings. But that feminine trauma is the trauma of the caging of our spirit, of our
Mhm.
expression. Is the suffocation of our voice. It's the repression of our sexuality, of our sensuality, of our emotional nature. And
Mhm.
when you collectively suppress emotions, the emotions of a woman, you're also suppressing the feminine in all beings. So men also struggle with that suppression of their inner feminine. And that's why it's so difficult for men to connect to that part of themselves. I mean, I I think that now it's a time where we as women, if we take on this healing and we allow ourselves to go crazy, even if the whole world is saying you're crazy and you make no sense, and we just burn through the trauma, allow ourselves to be rejected, allow ourselves to feel like we are crazy. And yes, maybe I am crazy. We are
Mhm.
giving permission to the entire planet of lose your shit so that emotional burden, that repressed emotion can actually come out and be expressed and be felt and be liberated. So
Mhm.
that's freedom.
Yeah. I think I think that it can be like such a hard thing to do for so many people though, because it's like there's this sort of glamorized version of spirituality online that so many influencers put out. And there's this kind of like version that exists that's so regulated, that's so stable, that's so like love
Yeah.
and light. And I think that can be a very invalidating experience for so many people on this journey because it makes you feel like you can't, like if you're going through like depression or anxiety or integrating your trauma, like you're in a state where like you're in bed all day, maybe you're crying, like you're using coping
Mm-hmm.
mechanisms. There's all of this stuff that to go crazy, it doesn't look beautiful. And
Yeah.
I think this is what needs to be spoken about more. I think this is why I'm so drawn to you because there's this, and this whole concept of shadow work is really emerging now within this space. And I guess that maybe if you can speak on that, like what is shadow work? What does it look like realistically?
Yeah. See, shadow work is, for me, it's like a reality. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a thing you do, it's a reality in which life invites you
Mm-hmm.
to go into your darkness. And your darkness is not what's bad about you, your darkness is what has been suppressed from your awareness. So what you can, when you haven't seen in yourself, what you haven't acknowledged, what you have rejected, and what you haven't felt.
Mm-hmm.
And when we go into that, and you know, it's a co-creative process, because it's not like, okay, I'm gonna go do shadow work and then you just go do it. It's very much like, what is happening? Everything in my life is falling apart, my relationship fell apart, I got fired, like all of the things happen at the same time, and we have no choice other than to feel it all, because all of our safety areas, all of the things in our life that we thought we had control over, are removed. So life helps us to enter into this reality where we have an invitation to feel it. And the beautiful thing about going into this space with just surrender and with faith is that we know that everything is happening in the now, in the present moment. And our traumas tend to be in the past. And we know from spiritual concepts that, well, the past is not real anymore. The only thing real is the now. But the emotions that you did not feel in the past, they're with you in the now. We carry them in our bodies. We carry them throughout our lives. Those emotions form belief systems. And with our belief system, we perceive reality to be a very certain way. So all of that trauma is available now, even though the story happened in the past. So when we're doing shadow work, and let's say that my partner dumped me or he left me, that is an opportunity for me to feel that abandonment. And in feeling that abandonment, I'm healing the abandonment that I felt as a child from my father. So it is all connected, and we always have the space and we have the opportunity of healing everything now, in the now. Things that we've been carrying for years, or even intergenerational trauma. It's not something that, how do I do shadow work? Feel it all. That's how we do shadow work. Feel, let the pain, let the despair, let the abandonment, let the yucky emotions that we reject so deeply because we don't enjoy feeling them, let them take over and surrender to that process, because naturally we know how to heal. Naturally we know how to move through all of this. So if we just get out of the way and we stop like constricting, then there's a space for transformation. And now what you were saying about what we see online, in the online space, about spirituality is like, every time, like in ceremony, for example, I've seen pictures online of people in ceremonies with makeup on and the beautiful dresses and the feathers. You know how I look in a ceremony? Like I had been puking all night, and I have like leftover mascara for like 3 days ago still left on my face, and my hair is a mess, and I have throw up on my clothes and in my hair, and I look pale and I look happy as hell, but I look like absolute crap. I don't think I've ever taken a picture after a really intense ceremony, because I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be capturing this. And that's healing.
Yes, totally. Like the space of like healing ceremonies and rituals, they're dark, man. Like they're so dark. Like you're feeling like your core wounds in these spaces. And the first time I did a mushroom ceremony, I had a very re-traumatizing experience. I didn't have an integration period afterwards. There was just so much information that was missing for me. And I think this is the thing when you take like indigenous traditions and bring them to the West, or as someone that grows up in the West experiencing these like native traditions that are foreign to where you come from, you miss like all of the integration that comes after it, or the wisdom that comes along with that culture.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Because we have to understand that these medicines, the guardians of this medicine have been the indigenous, and the indigenous have a very, very different life than us, culturally, emotionally, like everything, is still tribal way of living. So they grew up within a community, and everything's healed within the community. Things are corrected within the community. And something that nobody really seems to be talking about, I mean, there are some groups that actually do talk about it, and I'll like Spirit School and the Intheon Nation, they do talk about this. The indigenous communities are also traumatized because of all of the shit that happened with the invasions. So that trauma is still very much alive in the culture. And even with all of that, so they're dealing with their own crap, and they're guarding this medicine, and they're taking this medicine, and their understanding of it is based on their life in the jungles. It's based on their life in nature. We have been so disconnected from nature for so long that, like, for us, what is a snake? We know now what a snake means, but for them, it has a deeper meaning because they're so immersed in this space. And now we have the complexity of the Western mind. We have the isolation, we have all the social norms, we have, this is like a post-Renaissance period of the intellectualized human and concepts and philosophy. Like there's so much more complexities in our life. So now you're going to put a mind that has been conditioned and programmed by Western culture and by the history that entails, and give it this medicine that is just absolutely wild, and then be like, here's the medicine. And the indigenous, they're doing their thing. They're like, oh, this is how we do it with our people. Drink the medicine and then, vaya con Dios, like go with God and then heal yourself. But what we don't understand is that we have very fragile minds.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that endurance of living in the jungle, where that forms a different type of like resilience and relationship with earth, where they don't over romanticize nature. They're like, nature will kill you, so you have to respect her. And we're like, no, I want to be in nature because I want to come back to my mother.
Yes.
And so that's like that polarity of their respect for nature, because they know Mother Earth gives us, but she can also kill us very easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then our over romanticization of that with our super disconnected Western mind, we are not equipped to just take the medicine and then go on with our lives. We need support. And I think that this renaissance of plant medicine that's happening, and a lot of non-indigenous shamans learning the traditions, it's actually very beautiful. We have to make sure that we're honoring the tradition, honoring the indigenous, protecting them,
Mm-hmm.
giving back as much as we can, because they're giving us this medicine. And I'm done with the whole, oh, let me just take from you and then let's go give it to the West. Like, we have to create a different relationship. But I think that it's very wise that now there is, non-indigenous shamans coming, because they're trained from the indigenous, but then they have that Western understanding of our mind.
Yeah, like there's this Western model of like knowing that we in the West need like potentially psychotherapists present. We need we need people to facilitate our integration. There's going to be shit that comes up that we don't know how to deal with, and we're not in that indigenous environment anymore, or we don't have access, like 100% access to shamans or medicine men or medicine women to support us in this journey. And I think this is such a crucial piece that's missing, I find, within this kind of explosive space of medicine. Is we think we can, as you said, we think we can take or like adopt these healing modalities from indigenous cultures, but we don't think about what is necessary after we take medicine. And it can result in like I know for me, like after I did the mushroom ceremony, and it was intense, and it was a friend of mine that ran the ceremony. She's Mexican and she's very familiar with this medicine. But she'd gone back to Mexico after this, and I felt like I'd lost my mind in the ceremony. Like it deconstructed my ego to a level that was extremely uncomfortable for me. Like in that space, I became everything, I became everything. And when you become everything, it's like, wow, how beautiful, I am one with all. But when you become one with all, you become nothing simultaneously. And to lose the ego, to lose your persona, and to become everything, you have to feel what it is to be absolutely nothing.
Exactly. And also, what does it feel like to be everything? Because to be everything is not just to be love and light and joy, it's to be pain, it's to experience the most atrocious emotions that we feel as human beings. It's to feel the collective pain of slavery, the collective pain of trauma, of abuse, of like torture, everything. That's everything.
That is
plus
everything.
The good stuff.
Yeah.
All at once.
Yeah. It's like I drifted down into my own personal hell. Like it was extremely confronting, because I knew that space was me. And it was like being confronted by these deep, deep, deep shadows. And then once you become nothing and once you become everything, it's like, who the fuck am I? Like, I don't know who I am. And I think that triggered something. So it was really like a very cathartic moment. And I think I regretted that ceremony for maybe a year and a half. Because it just, like I didn't have any support after that. Like I didn't have anyone to talk to. Because also when you go through an experience like this, like you can't just like call up your BFF and be like, oh my God, you won't believe what I went through, like unless your BFF is also in that space, of course. But yeah, it can, I guess I also want to like talk about the realistic impacts of going through this healing work of clearing trauma of exposing yourself to your own demons, of confronting your own shadow space, is going to make you question your identity, question your
Mm-hmm.
existence, question your sense of belonging and why we're here on the planet. And I mean, these
Mm-hmm.
these questions are so important, but I think there is always the risk of getting lost in the like confusion of it all. And I think that's the space I was in for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I've had a few friends that have told me like I thought I was going crazy and I'm never in my life touching medicine again. It's
Mm,
just never happening. And I can see it's so important because the medicine is it's a feminine force. So
mhm.
it's like it opens you up to feel it all because that's what the healing is. And she, as the grandmother, receives it all. And because of that, because you have just this feminine flow of energy, you need a container. You need containment that needs to be
Mm,
held by very grounded individuals that know how to like maintain, how to not get lost in fear, how to not get lost in judgment, how to be able to observe what's happening inside the container and not let their own triggers intervene with the space holding. So that's why
mhm.
the indigenous are so good at this because you see them and there's somebody like screaming or crying, or there's somebody doing animal noises and they're like they're just like seeing it all, like I'm good, I'm here, I'm grounded.
Mhm.
And that's just the ceremony piece. And like you say, that's like the tip of the iceberg. Everything else that opens up in ceremony needs to be addressed. And there's so much symbolism and there's so much richness in mysticism. I
Mhm.
actually had an extremely, I mean, I've been drinking medicine for years, but I had a very traumatizing experience about a year ago. I was drinking medicine back in Colombia, and Colombian medicine is a little bit stronger, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And I just lost, and I felt the everything of the feminine polarity of like Lilith and Kali, and just that like
Mhm.
uncaged feminine essence. And there were like five men trying to hold me down, and I was like, the
Wow.
more they were trying to hold me down, the more I was like just like screaming, and I could feel the moon, the energy of the moon, like pulling all of this out. And it was extremely traumatizing because I have the understanding of the energies of Lilith, of Kali, because I've learned from other cultures as well. I've learned from, you know, tantric philosophies, I've learned from Celtic philosophies. So
Mm.
they have different archetypes that I've
Mhm.
learned from. So they are alive in my mind. And there's a part of my psyche that has connected to that. So in this release of energy, of that fiery feminine energy, the indigenous were like, well, she's possessed. What other explanation do we have for this? And they're like, oh, somebody's definitely doing witchcraft on you. And I'm like, oh my
Wow.
God, you have got to be kidding me. And in that space, I'm already so scared and I'm hearing this. And there was this one assistant that was just like, hey, hermana, like sister, remember love. And I'm like, oh,
Mm.
that one, that's the one I want to listen to.
Mhm.
Remember love. And in that whole process, I was able to learn to hold space for me in the wilderness, in the complete dissolution of Silvana and the embodiment of all the feminine fire, all the feminine repression expressed at once. And after that process, integration was actually extremely quickly. And
Mhm.
it was because there was this woman in that place that she came up to me and she said, she looked at me in the eye and she said, I know where you were at. I know where you were feeling. Thank you.
Wow.
And when she said that to me, I felt that she had been in the same place that I was that night before. And
Mhm.
the embodiment, the presence of this woman, her love, her compassion, her non-judgment, because everybody was looking at me like I was crazy. Like people will make eye contact with me and look away, like because it
Oh.
was crazy. And this woman just said that. And in that moment, I integrated it. As crazy as that sounds, in that moment, I'm like, wow, I understand. Like out of nowhere, the energy got organized. And then I'm like, oh my God, I am like a wolf. Like I am the servant of the moon. I am the, the one that's going to hold space for the woman from now on. And it was because she had that understanding by being there. And I also had wisdom, Celtic wisdom, Hindu wisdom, that was guiding me back to understand a different side of the feminine that maybe doesn't really, it's not really allowed in the indigenous culture. Because in the indigenous culture, they're like, women tend to be very reserved and quiet, and it's like more like the, what is that called, like the virgin, maiden, soft, feminine archetype, just like the gentle woman. Like very rarely you see an indigenous woman losing her shit. I'm sure it has happened, but it's just not socially there. So they weren't able to hold space for me. Even if I had the shaman, they'll be like, well, you must have something in you, because that's not normal. And now from this place, I'm like, actually, that is completely normal.
Yeah.
Exactly what needed to happen.
I can see why that would be so re-traumatizing as well, because like when you go into these spaces, when you go into these healing spaces, it's like you're uncovering your shadows, and it's crazy to think for that shadow to come up and be shamed, judged, rejected. That's like further validating the idea that you have to reject yourself or remain fragmented, and so
that's the invitation, that's the medicine. That's why I went there. That's why this whole thing happened. If everybody, the whole world around you rejects you, even the healers, are you going to still reject yourself, or do you choose to accept yourself? That was the healing.
That's a really intense space to be in. And I think these kinds of spaces aren't spoken about, because I think like we assume that when we come into spaces like this, we're always going to be validated, we're always going to be accepted. But the truth is, like in spaces of even the most spiritual of spaces have all of this judgment. Spirituality also has its shadow, and I feel like for me, it's like my spiritual journey has always been so individual. And like I'm not so in, I don't know, I've always sort of avoided spiritual communities because there are just so many shadows in this space still. And a lot of judgment as well. And I think I also grew up in this environment and a culture. I'm Indian, and it's funny speaking about Kali, actually. Like I grew up knowing that these types of goddesses were dark and dangerous. Very, very, and you didn't want to associate with these kinds of goddesses, and it kind of blacklisted you,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting to work in community with people, because there's also this element of being judged and shame within these spaces. And I don't know, for me, it's like I always have to kind of tiptoe my way through it. And I know I probably have my own like triggers and shadows with working in community, but yeah, I can't imagine like going through this experience you went through and then just being like, yep, she's possessed. Yep, she's crazy. Just like validating all of these your deepest fears about yourself and your identity.
Yeah, like the witch wound, all of those really old wounds in the history of our planet and the history of the feminine. And I, like you, I know that I still have a wound with communities as well, because I feel like my relationship with myself, I will rate it 10 out of 10. I have a great relationship with myself. Like I am not a bully to me at all. I'm very compassionate, and I live in a state of joy. And even when I experience emotions like anger and sadness, I feel them so deeply that then I just feel this sense of joy. And same thing in like romantic relationships. I have a very beautiful relationship, and I grow so much from it, and all of the triggers are worked in such a healthy way. But I avoid communities as well. And I take note of that. I'm like, I know that avoidance is because there is trauma there. For me, it's difficult to feel safe in groups, because for me it's safer to be one-on-one, because one-on-one I can feel you and I can get to know you and I can understand your level of consciousness and awareness within yourself, your relationship to yourself, and that will reflect your relationship to me. And that's easy, that's safe. I was like, okay, well, this person really likes themselves, they're connected to their essence, to their heart, this is safe for me to be me here. But then when you have the community component, there's everything. And I think the next step of my evolution is to be able to still be open and loving and be myself in community, but I have to be honest with myself, I'm just not there yet.
Yeah, I'm not there yet either. And I've always had this, like I've always been a one-on-one person. Like that's just, I really love that one-on-one connection. I have such an intimate connection with myself and I really enjoy having that with another person. But as soon as it's like this group environment, it's like it's so hard for me to expand my energy in that way. But similar to you, I've been like very challenged to open up to more community situations. It's so triggering for me. And I think that's because there is, I know this is my personal belief, but there is so much spiritual ego. Like I think the egos that exist in the spiritual community are some of the most, they can be, I should say, they can be some of the most manipulative and narcissistic in terms of what I've encountered. Because like when you expand your consciousness, when you evolve your consciousness, your ego doesn't disappear. Like it doesn't just, it's always going to be with you. And I find that the ego it has to become more clever for its survival. So there just have been certain situations that I've been in like the most spiritual situations, and I'll just be so triggered by like one person that's a complete and total narcissist, and I'm like, how is no one seeing this? And I think that's also why so many people who don't consider themselves spiritual avoid spirituality, because I think there are certain people that that are very weary of spiritual teachers or gurus or teachers or guides that kind of appear very like these cult like leaders almost, like I know, for example, my girlfriend, like she by nature is an extremely spiritual person, but she refuses to label herself that way.
Yeah, that happens. And some of the most enlightened people I've met in my life, like our gardener, I'm like, that man is enlightened because I see him working in the heat with his little hat and he sings and he's happy. And there's this sense of he walks with peace. And I'm like, this man is living the dream and he's the gardener. And he's not preaching about spirituality.
Yes, totally.
And it's so funny you bring this up because I once dated somebody that calls himself a spiritual teacher. What a shit show that relationship was.
Really?
Yes, but you know what? It was so good because it yanked me out of that thing you're describing, of that spiritual ego, of demonizing the ego. Guess what? It's here. And what our relationship to it is what really matters. A relationship, and can we have space for the ego, and can we have space for our divine nature? Because if not, you're in a state of absolute chaos. And what was interesting about this relationship is that, he talked beautifully about non-duality, and it was very like, it's like, wow, like there's so much wisdom. But he couldn't sleep at night. And I'm like, I used to wake up, I was like, why can't you sleep? He's like, I'm having mind attacks. My ego is attacking me because I have so much light that my ego doesn't want to die. And I'm like, fuck, like this is, everything on the surface, and they can like, hello, like this is me. Oh yeah, like I'm one with everything. Oh, and he was like jujitsu mind, wizard, just like boom, boom, boom. But he did not have peace and joy. He was constantly insecure. I'm like, that's not spiritual, in my opinion, because for me to be spiritual is to be in harmony with yourself and the world and spirit and all your shit and your shadows and your humanness.
And I think this is what I mean when I talk about like this glorified view of spirituality. I think some of the biggest like spiritual teachers that we see on social media, I just sense that there's kind of a front, there's a persona of like what this spiritualist is supposed to be putting out. But like there's such a specific narrative that they share, and it's only kind of one half of the picture. Like there's so many people not talking about like this, the darkness that's experienced, and like kind of working with the ego, managing your ego. And I mean, I have the same thing. Like, I'm so devoted to this path of returning to myself. And I really love sharing this information and this knowledge. But at the same time, I go through such lows, and I'll
Yeah.
have these nights where I can't sleep either. And my mind is really like also my worst enemy. And I try to like, I'm trying to be in harmony with that. And I try to be very transparent and honest about, and I think this is why shadow work is so important, and talking about the shadows within ourselves is so important, because yeah, there's just so many teachers out there that put out a very particular perspective and then kind of hide the rest. And I hope that the spiritual community can change in that way, because it seems like spirituality is blowing up right now. Like, and it
Mhm.
should be, because the world needs it. People need to heal. But I do really fear so much false light, like so many
Yeah.
false light narratives, and so many teachers that are actually just low-key narcissists. I don't know if you even like experienced that level of it.
Yeah, I've had experiences where it's been that's interesting, that subject of the spiritual narcissism,
Mm,
because I remember when I met that guy that I was talking about. I met him with another guy. I didn't know who he was, but apparently I found out later on he's like kind of like a cult leader. And I remember that
the guy that you were
when
dating, or the friend?
no, the
Okay,
friend
okay.
of the guy, he was a cult leader, and I found out later on. But during that time, they like I met them all at the same time. So like I was like flirting with my ex-boyfriend because that's the one I like. But then this guy was flirting with me. It was kind of like one of those situations. And
Mhm.
the guy that was a cult leader, he once sends me this gigantic text message saying like, the light of consciousness of the 70 wants to transmit itself through me to my heart to blah blah blah, like huge. I'm like, wow, this doesn't mean anything. Like it's just like a bunch of big words.
Words.
Basically the gist of the message was that if I slept with him, I was going to get enlightened or some shit.
Oh my God. Wow.
And and then I remember telling my boyfriend about it. He's like, oh my god, he must be a narcissist. And then we like demonize that cult leader because it's like he's the narcissist, and then we're both talking
Mhm.
about it. And then
Mhm.
in this relationship, I'm like, oh my god, I think my partner is a narcissist. And then I'm like, you're a narcissist. And then I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I'm a narcissist. And I'm like, shit, I am a narcissist.
I
Oh
have
my
this
god.
same awareness. Thank
Oh
you.
my God. And I realized that that narcissistic virus was living in me. I was like participating in the I'm better than you, and you're this, and this is shadow, and that's your ego. Like
Mm,
I got stuck in that shit, and I'm like,
mm,
oh no, 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 no. I don't want this. And during that time, I actually changed my line of work because I was very much into, like, I was a spiritual healer. That's what I was, a spiritual healer. And I'm like, I'm out.
mm,
I'm going to become a coach. And then I became a
mhm.
coach because the coach has a little bit more of the grounded term. And yeah, my coaching, like, there's no way that I can not talk about the divine. It's just impossible for me to
Yeah.
do. So it's there. The healing's there. It's happening. I'm
Mhm.
transmuting that energy, but I'm not giving it. I'm not saying like, I'm going to send you a healing right now,
Yes.
or that's your ego. It's like, no, you know what? I got my ego. I got an inner narcissist. I got an inner bitch. I got an inner, like all of the things that I observe in reality and judging others. I can pinpoint at least one time in my life where I have engaged in that energy myself.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if I just take everything like I am that, yes, and I feel it and I sit with it, then it has light. Then you have
Yeah.
put the eye of awareness onto it, and then it's no
Mhm.
longer this hidden enemy on the background. So yes,
Totally.
we are all the things. We are the narcissist. We are the monster. We like And something very triggering that I'm going to say, so maybe trigger warning, everyone, is that women that say that they have been victims of narcissistic partners have a narcissistic side to them.
Totally.
What? But I was abused, I was manipulated. The narcissist part of you is the part that refuses to feel the pain because it wants to feel whatever illusion the relationship is giving you. Like that's a truth that it hurts, but it will set you free if you can start looking at it. Everything we observe exists within us, and that is freedom.
Totally. I'm so glad you brought that up. I got really trapped in that illusion as well of being the empath, like like at so many light workers, so many people like in this realm of spirituality, it's like I am the empath, and we really glorified this term. And to be the empath in an empath-narcissistic relationship, there's a certain level of power to that, because it's like, oh, woe is me. I am the victim. I am the empath. I am the victim to the narcissist. But in that, there's this narcissistic imprint of, please pity me. Please feel sorry for me. Please help me.
I'm entitled to that pity.
Yes. And I am better than the narcissist because I am an empath and they're a bad person exploiting me. When in reality, and I've realized my position as an empath, like, and this was so confronting, that I have allowed other people to overtake my energy. And also, like, in being this empath, like, there's a certain level of like, I don't know, for me anyway, there was like, I can heal this person. I can fix this person. I'm the only one. And that is also very narcissistic. And yeah, it was interesting because also within this, when I encountered, there was a specific ceremony that I went to where I encountered a narcissist, which I just mentioned before. And it was such a triggering experience because I was like, how could this happen? Like, how could I like come to a space where it's such a high frequency? There's the people that are here are so amazing. Like, how has this person ended up here? And I couldn't get it off my mind. Like, I was like, how have I like managed to encounter a person like this on my journey, which is a little bit narcissistic in itself, to think like, oh, like I am so high and mighty.
I'm so clear.
I'm so evolved. How could I, the light worker, encounter a narcissist? And it was so confronting. And it was like after encountering it, like a couple of other narcissists as well. And I was like, oh my God, they are mirroring an imprint that I have within myself that I have yet to clear. So I think it's so amazing that you bring this up, that like we all have like this wound of narcissism, this kind of imprint of narcissism, the shadow of narcissism, I should say, exists in all of us. And of course, it's going to be just as present in spiritual spaces. So
yeah. And I think an important point that I want to make is to depolarize what is the energy of the narcissist, because it sounds like it's a word that's so energetically charged. It's like that could be the worst thing you could be. But narcissism develops whenever you experience trauma and you are unable to feel the emotional imprint of that trauma, and you don't have the support to help you with that. Therefore, you develop an identity that protects that, and it protects ourselves from feeling that at all cost, So in that energy, the narcissist is just a type of wound it has a lot of like power, protective power behind it. And like at the end of the day, everything that we judge as like that's bad, that's terrible, that's monstrous, it's just the product of a wound. And how do we get wounded? Because our innocence gets imprinted in a very painful way. So it is our inner child. It is our most innocent self that gets that. And how can we demonize the part, the child that got imprinted, that formed the carcass to protect itself, that developed the narcissistic personality to protect itself? It's like, at the end of the day, it's just a distortion created by trauma. So it depolarizes it. It's like, no, it's not that the narcissist. I've read articles it is a psychopath and blah, blah, like even the psychopath has a story. Like for as long as we keep engaging with this you versus me, and you're bad and I'm good, we're stuck in it. We are stuck in that wheel of duality, and we can stay stuck there as long as we want. But if we want to experience real, genuine peace and freedom, then we gotta get out of it by realizing that there is no other. It's all us.
Yeah. And oh my God, it is a humbling experience. Like, I think once you start going down this path, I don't know, like, I think you get to these points where you're like, oh my gosh, like I've like hit this beautiful awareness, and like like you feel so good about yourself for reaching these like certain heights. Like I think it's kind of, I don't know if it's like a bit of a masculine spirituality where we feel like we're climbing this ladder of ascension and elevating our consciousness and yada yada yada. But then like you'll come into these experiences where you're so highly triggered and you realize like, oh fuck, like am I the narcissist? And then it's like boom, coming back to the ground.
Depth.
You are humbled immediately by spirit.
Yeah, wow. It's like what you were talking about. It's height versus depth. You know, and height is that masculine part of us that wants to like achieve enlightenment, like even the words of it, achieve enlightenment, as if it was something to achieve. But that's where we form our disciplines to like choosing what's right, and that's a very beautiful necessary energy. But then you have the depth, which is the feminine, which is just love it all, love your shadow, love your pain, love your enemy, love, love, love. And I don't know how this process was for you, but the moment that I had the realization and the enlightenment, the awareness that I was the narcissist, I was in absolute shame. And it was the most painful cry. I was like in the floor, like, oh, just like, oh my God, moving so much, but feeling so ashamed and so terrified, and feeling like who I thought I was an absolute lie. And it was just, you know, in that, from that place, I went so low emotionally that I found peace there.
Wow.
It's like, wow, it's all. And the other day I was doing a live, and then somebody goes into the live, and then they put something like, oh, you think you're such a guru, you narcissistic bitch, and blah, 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 blah. And you know what? I'm like, huh. Where if I would have heard that or read that before that realization, I would have gotten so deeply offended. And I would have been like, you're the narcissist. How dare you come to my page, you know? And we become immune to these things because I'm like, I'm a narcissistic bitch. Oh yeah, like you're picking up on some truth because that exists within me. At some point in my journey, it existed within me. Therefore, like, what, you're not telling me anything I don't know.
Yeah,
and there's no pain.
totally. And I think like as you were saying, like when you descend, I've realized recently, like it's only when you descend and when you fall, when you let yourself fall, that you can actually even reach surrender. Like you can't actually surrender when you're elevating. Like you actually have to fall to surrender. Like it's the only place to surrender. You don't surrender when you're climbing. You surrender when you're falling, in my experience. So yeah, I wonder like because I feel like masculine spirituality is very dominant in the space. Like when we think of like all of the most famous podcasters in this space, all of the loudest voices, like a lot of it is very, very masculine. And I find that there's always this like, even before when you were talking about this guy that's like, I'm accessing like the seventh dimension, it's through me that you can, it's just like very like even talking about these numbers and not negating that these things don't exist. Like there are the levels and there are the dimensions, that ascension is so relevant. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm in a really like humble space of descending within myself at the moment. It's grueling, it's dark, it's ugly. And it's very personal and private too.
Yeah.
But I think in this, and I didn't realize that this is the feminine space. It's so beautiful the way that you put it now. But yeah, I think I'm being very confronted by this feminine aspect because I can be very like cognitive about my spirituality. But it's nice to know, like just as we're talking about this, I'm like, okay, the feminine is here too. Like,
yeah. And the feminine is that untangible, invisible aspect. So,
Mhm.
our like the masculine spirituality, this is so fascinating to me. I recently started studying the feminine path of individualization in tantric practices.
Mhm.
And it's very different than what we know of like the practices are in spirituality, because this philosophy looks at the female body as the physical manifestation of the feminine in human form.
Mhm.
And because of that, in this tradition, the feminine is the closest to spirit because it's the portal between worlds, it's connected to the moon. So it has a natural attunement for that spiritual connection. Now, the masculine is the master of this reality in terms of like the effort and like the pushing of
Mm.
effort to achieve something.
Mhm.
Because of that, the practices for men are about breath work and then meditation, like focusing and discipline and forming more of that Shiva presence of like, I am unmovable because I'm so strong. And you have Shiva, right? Just like so, like his back is straight and there's
Mhm.
this like rigidity that it's unmovable. It's like, it doesn't matter what's going on. He is in his meditative state. Now, Shakti is all around him, moving and being like smoke and flowing. And she's using this like expression. And that is that feminine energy.
Mhm.
So the feminine in us moves that way, and the
Mhm.
masculine in us is the one that needs that. So for my masculine energy, I need to meditate a few minutes, even not like, even if I don't sit down, just like maintain meditative space for a few minutes to strengthen that. But then for my feminine practices, I take a lot of care in myself. Whenever at night I'm putting on all my night creams, how I
Mhm.
do that, how does my skin feel, like how do I look, what do I need to do to play with my physical body,
Mhm.
pluck an eyebrow or whatever it is. It's like the attention to the mundane, the way that
Mhm.
I water my plants, when I am like petting my dogs. Those are the feminine practices in this new school of thought that I'm exploring. And
Yep.
I realized, oh my God, all my life I felt like shit because I never felt inclined to these very masculine practices.
Yes.
And this is giving me permission to just be, and I've never been happier. Like I am just
Mhm.
flowing. And if somebody tells me that's not spiritual, I'm like, okay, I feel great. I feel wonderful. So for me, that's what this is
Yes.
about.
It's so interesting because I'm in a space right now where my body and my being, like, I cannot wake up at 5 a.m. Like, at the moment, I'm sleeping until 10 or 11. And I'm like, you know what? That's what my being is requiring of me now. It's like, I'm giving it's like honoring myself, honoring my
Yeah.
true and natural needs. And it's so against what we see online of like
Yes.
waking up at 5 a.m., meditating, doing breath work. Like it's just such a defined picture of this is spiritual. And then you see like
Yeah.
this very feminine element of like lying and lounging in bed and enjoying your morning slowly without actually having any purpose or reason or rhyme to do anything that you're doing. It's pure being.
The permission that
The
gives you, right? To be like,
permission.
you're not the only one that just wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Like that if society wants to judge it, then do it, but you cannot
Mm-hmm.
take this piece,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah,
freedom of being there.
it's so good. Like it's amazing like when you allow yourself the space to just do what feels right. Like
Mhm.
everything changes. You're like, "Oh yeah, I can do this. Like this is okay. Like this is also an important practice for me." Life changing. It's really life changing, but I think it's so much of like getting out of that conditioned mindset, especially like if you've done the 9 to 5 Monday to Friday work
Yeah.
grind, like we're so programmed to think that right, it's sleeping in and it's
Mhm.
lazy, but actually it's honoring the feminine inside of you.
Yeah, yeah. And the feminine is collectively exhausted. The feminine in all
Mhm.
human beings is exhausted.
Oh, I feel that. Yep. Yep.
So
It's
yes, guess what? We're about to enter a period where a lot of us are going to just be lazier, or
mhm.
we see it, like you talk, yes, you have the conversations like that happen visibly, but if you really talk to somebody you trust, a girlfriend, and and like people that are like really how would I say, like people that they really trust, they'll tell you like, oh my God, I am exhausted. Like everybody is exhausted. Why? Because we cannot be in take the burden of all this
Totally.
emotional repression anymore.
Yeah, I think there's like, I don't know, I'm feeling this for myself, but I've been like emotionally burnt out. Like I am so emotionally burnt out right now. And I keep remembering like that I think so many people are experiencing like certain levels of depression right now. And I always remember that depression is really like this need for deep rest. And I think so many people, we've been like catapulted into these states of deep rest because we're so burnt out from like
Yeah.
so much of this survival mode and like this excess of this masculine energy that we've, that has been pushing us. And I don't know, I think it's powerful to understand the difference between the masculine and the feminine energies within us. And actually, maybe this is a good topic to sort of like finish up on, but I was when we spoke last time in your coaching container, you brought up you said a few words that I'd like never heard before, but it was like connecting to the inner mother and the inner father. And I'd never heard that. Like I'd never heard of the concept of the inner mother and the inner father. And to know that you have access to the inner mother, the inner father, even the divine mother, like that's another concept that's really held me through all of the wound clearing and trauma work and healing work that I've been doing. But these concepts of the inner father, the inner mother, the divine feminine, the divine masculine, they're all kind of taking on a much more expanded it's like there's an expanded understanding of what that actually means.
Yeah. So it's funny because I'm currently teaching a course on healing the mother wound. And it feels like, oh, it's just the mother wound. But the reason why I decided to do that, I actually had to explain this yesterday. Yesterday, I had a discovery call with a woman to work one-on-one with me. And as we were going through the whole exploration, it was very clear, and she saw it as well, that it was, a rejection of her mother that she was struggling with, because deep down she felt rejected by her mother. So, she just protected herself. And I told her, like, look, I don't think that one-on-one will be very beneficial right now, because you need to do some groundwork for you to really get the most out of one-on-one work. And she's like, okay, yeah, what should I do? And I'm like, I have a course and it's heal the mother wound. And she was just like, no, so what I'm interested in, Silvana, is like connecting with my divine feminine, with pleasure, with receivership. I was like, yes. And I'm telling you, it starts with the mother wound. And she's like, but it's not, like, I know I have shared with my mom, but I don't want to deal with that right now. I think if I connect this with this part of receiving, then I can. And I was like, no, like, it's just, I mean, you can, of course, you can do whatever you want. But if you really want to follow the energy, you have to begin with the mother. Why? Not because it's about your physical human mother, but because the moment you learn to mother yourself and outsource the need of mothering to the divine mother, then you no longer force, or you no longer feel the need of these people to fulfill the role of mother. You free your physical human mother from mothering you, because you learn to mother yourself, and you harness that need to have a mother to the divine mother. And that creates freedom, because once you have that nurturing spirit in you, and you have awakened that inner mother, because that inner mother comes directly from the divine mother, the goddess, then the divine father in us is the one that protects and creates boundaries and leads this vehicle into more growth. Then we are able to reach that inner marriage, and that inner marriage of Shiva and Shakti, that is the ultimate marriage. That's the divine marriage that we can experience. But it begins with that, because when we learn to mother and father ourselves, then we know how to navigate this human life and how to hold ourselves through transformation. So connected. It is crazy. People want to hear it, but that's it. That's the root. The mother and the father.
It's so funny. Like, I think so much of our trauma and our wounds, I think most of it goes to the mother and the father wound. Like, these are two core wounds everybody has. And so interesting. Like sometimes I like watch certain friends like trying to navigate through life or like poor relationships or whatever kind of patterns or struggles they're going through. And I can kind of see now, I'm like, this is your father wound or this is your mother wound. But like there's such an aversion to dealing with these wounds because they're so painful. Like they're
Yeah.
so painful. They're so fragile
Yeah.
and so delicate. But
Yeah. And we all have them. And the reason why we all have them, it's because if you look at back in the day, our ancestors' history, the mother that we live in, Mother Earth, was very cruel. We
mm,
like she would kill us. We have
mhm.
Mother Earth trauma. That's like
Wow.
the beginning of it. You see? So it's like if
Wow.
you really go back to the origin, the earth, she's like the earth is not, you go out into the jungle, you will die if
You
you
will
don't know how
die.
to take care of yourself. Like you will die. The mother will kill you. And we didn't always have these houses and apartments and structures. We
Mhm.
had to learn to make them. So we have mother trauma, all of us, every human on this earth, because of that root trauma.
Oh my God, that's so powerful. I especially like love how you were saying like outsourcing the outsourcing this this love to the divine mother so you can sort of
Mhm.
stop expecting like your maternal mother to provide
Yeah,
you things that their human is potentially not capable of. But
exactly.
wow, I never thought about it like the mother wound going back to like the earth and yeah,
Mhm.
like her sheer ability to totally wipe us out in a second
Yes.
if she wanted to.
We have a tough mother. This she loves us and takes care of us, but she was tough. She is tough.
Mm.
So that's just the nature of our planet. So in a way, I guess
Mhm.
we were meant to have this mother wound so we can find love. So
Mhm.
real mothering energy could be born from the absence of it, from thinking that Mother Earth is harsh, then how can I become that mother that I need and desire?
Mhm. Mhm. And I guess how do you like once you have this awareness of the true capabilities of Mother Gaia, like how do you manage knowing that she can potentially kill you with also
Mhm.
like knowing her infinite the infinite love that exists within her for us? Like how do you balance those two awarenesses?
I think that the relationship I have with Mother Earth is a relationship of humility and respect.
Mm. Mhm.
And when you approach nature with humility and respect, she takes care of you. It's the most interesting thing.
Mm.
It's like I was once hiking and I was in San Pedro, and I remember that I was so dizzy, and the shaman was like, "Keep hiking. This is part of it. Keep hiking." And I was just like, "Oh, I might fall. I might fall." And I just heard this voice saying, "Then stay close to the ground." And I'm like, "Stay close to the ground. Stay humble. Stay humble." And I was the only one who didn't fall in this muddy, super steep mountain because I was close to the ground, and I was like, the whole climb up, I was like, Mother, like you can kill me at any moment because I could crumble right now, and I love you. I'm so sorry. Like that reverence. And that's what we don't have
Wow.
because we're exploiting her. We're like taking
Mhm.
resources, and that's not the way. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
really know what's the world solution, but I know what feels right in my heart, and it's to be respectful and be humble.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I guess that's where it starts. Like the world solution is maybe just everyone having their own individual solution and their own individual
I agree. Yeah, that resonates. Yeah.
relationship. And yeah, I think respect is so important in this. So yeah, I didn't think
Mhm.
about that. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing all of this.
Thank
Wow.
you so much. What a great
I know
conversation.
it's been really exciting. Like it's sort of flown by as well. Please share where everyone can find you, or if people are interested in connecting with you and your work, where's the best place to do that?
You can find me at silvanaisaza.com or
Mhm.
on my Instagram, silvana.isaza. And on my website, I have a free ebook, and it's called Healing the Mother Wound. I wasn't too creative with that title,
But
but
you know
straight
what?
to the point.
It maybe doesn't need creativity, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just healing the mother wound, period. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I have a free ebook there, resources, and then on Instagram I put most of my content. It's also on my blog, so yeah, you can connect with me there.
Cool. Thank you so much. And
Oh,
yeah,
thank you so much, Tanya. This was
of
lovely.
course.